Hello YouTube and welcome back to another 3D ROS video. Today I'm going to give you my top 10 tips for improving your 3D art. My first tip is use masks. Masks can increase development speed and give you so much more control over your final asset. They are also super flexible, allowing you to reuse the masks or even entire materials, yet create variation through parameter changes. Okay, so my second tip is tiling textures / materials. Now this might seem like quite an obvious one, but really you need to understand the reuse of textures. Reusing textures is not only time efficient, it is also resource efficient, and it also helps your art stay consistent, making the scene look like a coherent place. So the reuse of tiling textures or materials is very important. You also want to make sure that you don't just have a tiling texture in terms of no seams. You also want a tiling texture in the sense that it has no extreme light or dark values, because when you can clearly see a difference, you can see the repeating pattern. Even if it's tiling, it doesn't necessarily mean the tiles. So keep an eye on your high and low frequency values and adjust it if need be. And then from there, you can use masks, like I explained in the previous tip, to help you create variety and also add decals to overlay on top of the material to break up the texture a bit. Tip number 3 is trim sheets. So this links back to the previous point about tiling materials, but with a twist. Trim sheets are like tiling materials, however they only tile on one axis. This allows us to fit many tiling materials into one texture set. Of course, trim sheets have their limitations, like only tiling on one axis. However, they are very beneficial to a scene, allowing you to add repeating trim textures throughout your environment, character, or prop. My next tip, tip number 4, is channel packing. Channel packing allows you to pack multiple grayscale textures in one texture. It shows your optimization skills and allows you to reuse masks without a great performance hit. So, channel packing is packing grayscale textures and assigning each texture to a RGB value, so red, green or blue. So one grayscale texture can be in the red, one can be in the green, one can be in the blue. And it just helps you optimize your workflow so that you can reuse it without the big performance hit. My 5th tip for you today is primary forms. It comes back to fundamentals of art. Break down the asset you are trying to build into key shapes. Once you've broken down the primary forms, only then go down to secondary and tertiary details. This is extremely important, especially when it comes to complex meshes. You don't want to get too bogged down by all the detail. Start off with the overall shape, then work your way in. Of course, be mindful of how extra detail is going to affect your topology, but as far as breaking down the mesh, take note of the primary faces and silhouettes first. 3D art tip number 6 is LODs. Now this is not inherently a tip, but just something to be mindful of. When creating 3D art, we need to think about resolution. Not just texture resolution, but geometry resolution also. The higher resolution things are, the more we can push details, but at the cost of high file sizes, slow loading times, and in the case of games, unplayable frame rates. It's important you balance your level of detail not only for visual and composition harmony, but for getting the most out of a system's hardware. Auto LODs are another thing you need to be aware of. This mainly becomes a problem with texture bleeding. When you get further away from an asset, the PC will either switch to low-res assets that you've assigned, or auto-generate them. In the case of textures, you need to make sure your texture map has enough bleed room as to not seep colour from other faces. So that means having UV maps appropriately spaced and padded as well. You may have seen infinite padding like this in programs like Substance Painter, where it fills the empty texture space with stretched nearby colours. This is to avoid harsh colour change bleeds across UVs when the textures automatically bump down in resolution as you get further away. Number 7 is proportions. Proportions and scale are very important when trying to create a realistic model. Sometimes it can be the main thing letting down your work, and a lot of the time you won't know what it is. Your work will just look off. To alleviate such problems, it's helpful to research the correct size for the asset you are creating. Using reference images will help you get the rest of the proportions right once you have a blueprint to model off of and have it scaled appropriately. Sometimes what I personally do, because I'm stuck at approximating measurements, is I keep a small tape measure on hand when I'm working. I'll have a rough idea of how large the asset is and pull my tape measure out to that length. From there I have a rough guide to go off of. Of course, it also helps to measure objects around you too. Tip 8 links back to what I previously mentioned. It's use references. Not just for modelling, but for texturing, lighting, composition, and more. References help a lot. Break down the primary forms of your reference, like I mentioned earlier, and take inspiration from a wide range of sources to help you develop your art in the right direction. Sometimes we think we know what something looks like, but when it comes down to it, you'd be surprised how our brain interprets things. 3D art tip number 9 is think technically. Take some time during pre-production to really visualize your idea, the direction you want to take, and how you're going to approach the creation of your art. It's no good spending a few hours sculpting a model if in the end you decide sculpting would not be the most effective workflow for that type of asset. Think hard about the results you are looking for and how that's going to factor into your workflow. By thinking technical, I also mean think practically about your assets. Just like character artists need a decent understanding of anatomy, you need to take the time and learn the technical know-how to produce the best art possible, be it workflow related or the physical construction of an object. Take the time to study your subject and apply your knowledge to your work. My 10th and final tip for today is spend the time. I understand this is pretty much a given, but everybody works at their own pace. Don't compare yourself with others. To spend the time working and honing your skills. Of course, there's many things you can do to work smarter and improve faster, but in the end, messing around, practicing, and putting in the time is the best teacher. You learn so much from just experimenting, and is personally how I improve the most. Nothing beats experience, and the only way to get that experience is putting in the work. So go off, have fun, and create something awesome. So yeah, that concludes this video. I hope you found it very informative. If you did or appreciate the effort I put into these videos, please leave a like and consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps me out a lot. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.